that, you'd like to be with us, but not show your smile, that's also okay. So who are we? We are innovators, we're design thinkers, we are learners. So just for you to see that if you resonate with this, or if it's something new that you're bringing to the table, that's also amazing for us. We're a space where we are kind, we are empathetic, and we share. So just for everybody to be mindful of that. And I welcome you all. So today's session is something that, it's thought-provoking. It makes you think, and it also makes you analyze and reflect on how and why and in what space are you thinking. We were just having a very short chat, and I brought up Danny's wife's cake, and and then Yunyan says that your recollection is so selective. So is that the way that we think, and does that affect the way that we use it in design thinking? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So I'll switch it over and hand the ball to my lovely speakers today, Anna and Sandra. So over to you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Before I start screen sharing and you see fewer people and more PowerPoint, I just want to say in the name of Anna and myself, how honored and humbled we are to get this limelight here, to get the opportunity to present here. We are kind of visiting guests in the sphere of design thinking because our background is learning, is helping people who lead teams and individuals and organizations to become more effective at what they do. We've both been doing this for a long time. And we also became involved a bit more in design thinking when COVID hit the world, because we decided to use some of that enormous amount of free time we all of a sudden had to qualify in design sprint facilitation. So that's how we learned a lot about design thinking, and we got pulled into this wonderful Wednesday web jam, and we just love the whole spirit of sharing and kindness and learning from each other. So when Anupa offered us to share some of what we do into this community, we said yes, and then we thought, oh my God, are we mad? And now we're here. So thank you very much for having us. So my name is Sandra. I'm a leadership development person. I design leadership development programs. I design learning experiences for people who lead others in organizations in crazy times and want to become more resourceful and more effective at that. And I've had the fantastic pleasure of working with Anna for a number of years now. Anna, do you want to say hello?
Yeah. Sure. Hello, everyone. Very similar experience to Sandra's, just slightly older, even it doesn't look like, right? And just a different accent. I'm based in Barcelona in Spain. And like Sandra, many years of experience, a trainer, facilitator, coach, and really excited to be here today. Sandra said that we felt honored and humble, and I will add that we felt also a little nervous about this opportunity, but very excited.
Okay. Great, I'll bring up some slides that we've prepared for today. So the topic for today is, as you saw in the description, is we want to share with you a little bit about what have been trends in leadership development design. What have we been able to observe in terms of what is deemed necessary and relevant when you put quality leadership development experiences together, and why is that the case? And that led us to really focusing on anything to do with understanding the human brain. That is the thing in leadership development right now. There has been such a surge in the founding of neuroscientific leadership studies and leadership centers that all oscillate around the neurosciences. Why is that, and what can it deliver? So we want to give you a bit of a developmental overview of the trends in leadership development design that led to this surge on the brain, and then look at how good is the brain actually in managing the challenges that leaders need to handle nowadays, and just share with you some quirky fallacies of the brain before we give you a chance to then go into breakout and discuss these things yourselves. How are you affected by that in your life as design thinkers and in your work? And how do you keep your brain in check? So hopefully it's going to be fun. Yeah, so a few trends, the history of leadership development design. So this doesn't actually, I'm not claiming here to be super in-depth and scientifically super accurate. There might be some things that have happened in these trends that I'm missing out here, but just as an idea of when did people actually start thinking about leadership development is something that needs to become a discipline. I think roots right back from something like the 1950s, where people started first thinking about, so what makes people qualify as a leader, and can you actually learn to have these characteristics of a leader person? Most times in those days that would be male persons, and therefore if you design a program for leaders, what kind of knowledge do you need to put in there so everybody can become this ideal leadership person? So the thinking was very much around, if we can identify what kind of traits a leader has, then we just need to teach people that like monkeys, and then they can all be great leaders. Which was a very kind of early man approach in design thinking for leaders, and that evolved very, very much in the 60s and 70s, as I think as the cradle of what we now have as agility and agile thinking. In realizing, actually, when you work in big organizations, when you work with different people, you will meet a lot of variety of situations, as well as personalities, as well as interests and motivations. So you kind of need to become more adaptive and flexible. Just having those cool traits that make you this leader person isn't quite enough anymore. And I mean, if you want to, share with us in the chat what kind of individuals you might have experienced as managers or leaders in your roles, in your jobs, or in your projects. Maybe you've seen different styles, different approaches there. We've certainly learned a lot or taught a lot in those early days around different situational leadership models or different personality models. Everybody wanted to do MBTI personality profiling to understand how I tick and how I can adjust myself to other personalities. So that all comes from those days. And then a really interesting thing happened in my views, because we started talking about leadership and leadership development less in terms of the people who lead, but leadership was started to be viewed as a function. Organizations need to be led properly to cope with the demands and the markets they're in, to sustain themselves longer than the next economic crisis. And all of a sudden, what became really relevant for leaders was to be change agents and to handle change and to drive change and to lead others through change and help to transform organizations. And we moved from thinking about the people much more to the change processes therein. Then another trend happened when we felt that leaders had to be much more focused on their ability to influence and to be networked and to be connected, despite the world being very globalized and teams being very virtual. And that led to this latest trend that said we need a science that is reliably informing us about all these complicated human interactions. And then leadership development design discovered the brain and discovered what it means to understand how we think, how the way we perceive the reality impacts our thinking processes, how the way we feel impacts our emotion, our thought processes, how we can become better at understanding emotional reactions in humans so we can guide them better through the complex world. And we feel that any design of a leadership development program, a coaching intervention, a training session that is really in touch with what's going on right now is demanding this connection to helping people who manage others to become a lot more knowledgeable around these neuroscientific insights and grow their ability to be in touch with their own brain and their own thought processes to be effective as people managers. So this is what we feel has made this brain thing, the thing in leadership development design. So we qualify and read and learn all the time about latest trends in neurosciences. But today we want to talk about the fallacies of the brain and why actually the brain is maybe not such a reliable source to go back to define what effective leadership makes. And one of the main reasons why we chose this subject was because what we see is when we work with groups of leaders or individuals that despite them understanding quite easily all these things around the brain, acting on behalf of this knowledge is much harder. Putting what you understand about the brain into action is the hardest part, and people still continue to struggle with the world's complexity. Here we see this infographic about the aging population in Europe. And this is just one of the trends of what's going on in the wider world right now that leads to aspects such as every workplace now is very multi-generational. So if you want to manage in a big company, you need to understand how different generations view work, how they get motivated, how they can collaborate despite having quite different views maybe on each other, on relationships, on what a good manager looks like. We have much bigger challenges in integrating diverse views of the world. There is a trend that we see much more polarized positions on certain topics that affect us all. So we really see that despite, or whilst we're getting a lot more knowledgeable about the brain on the one hand, on the other hand, the challenges in dealing with the complexity of the world are remaining or getting even bigger than ever before in our eyes. So the brain is obviously letting us down in a number of aspects. So that's kind of the framing proposition I wanted to share with you. And I would like to hand over to Anna to start taking us a bit more into the brain.
Yeah, Sandra, you have mentioned a few words that I'm sure are resonating a lot in all of our guests' brains. Things like complexity and making decisions and navigating through this complexity and how our brains sometimes let us down. And this is where we want to focus for the next few minutes, like where do bad decisions come from? If you are like me, sometimes, only sometimes, you make some bad decisions, right? And you wonder, why is this happening? I have information, I know how to do my job, I know how to handle this situation, still some decisions are wrong. And this is just because our brains, our minds are always at work, sometimes in ways that may trip us up, because we have this, another term that Sandra already mentioned, these fallacies or these biases, these mental distortions that can impact our ability to make decisions. And in research has shown that's why we are showing this slide here, there are more than 100 biases or fallacies that have been identified that, of course, again, impact our ability to perform, our ability to make decisions. And while we do not have the time today, of course, to go through all these more than 100 fallacies, we do want to explore the few most commonly found, especially in organizations, but you can probably relate that to your personal life as well. So first, a couple of definitions. We have already mentioned the word bias. Can you put in the chat, what is your understanding of bias? And then we will give you a more academic definition of both bias and fallacy, because we are going to be using these two terms almost as synonyms. So let's see if we get any definitions in the chat. And while you are writing that, as we said before, we cannot get rid completely of these biases that impact our ability to make decisions or perform. Oh, preference. Okay, what you consider to be true. Excellent. Very good definition. Subconscious preferences, gender, race, absolutely. It has impact in all areas that we operate in. Habits, bias, expressing personal belief. Excellent, excellent. Preconceived idea about something or someone, that's very good. Exactly, so it's a preconceived idea or notion about someone or something. And usually biases are formed through our life experience, culture, education, and fallacies is slightly different, which is when we take information from a faulty resource, or we take faulty information and we use it when making decisions. So it's very interesting how they are connected, but they are slightly different. However, today we are going to be using these two terms almost as synonyms. And something very important, as we said, there are many biases and fallacies. We are going to focus on 5. And the purpose here is not to get rid of those, because we can't, you cannot, but you can become more aware of when those biases are sabotaging your ability, again, to make decisions and understand where those bad decisions sometimes come from. Let's see, other personal filters. Jan, I like that. Your personal filters, absolutely. Great. Thank you very much for sharing with us your understanding of these fallacies. Oh, specific fallacies in future thinking. Thank you for sharing that, Silvan. Very interesting. We'll have a look at that. All right, so let's move on now and start talking about these 5 fallacies that we have found are really common in organizations and also in many other arenas. So the first one, very familiar to all of you, I'm sure, is the confirmation bias, which means that we tend to take information and pieces of information that already prove what you already know about something or someone. Yeah. So one example that Sandra and I always run into is when we are designing programs, for example, for certain organization, and we get the information that, this is a company where most of participants are going to be engineers. So we already are, designing our programs thinking of very detailed people who want very specific information. And of course, when we work with those individuals, we tend to confirm those confirmation bias. Yeah. So it's about affirming our prior beliefs or hypotheses about something and not
Mark,
looking.
thank you. Yeah. Absolutely, engineers are totally cool, Mark. And I find it so important sometimes. I don't even want to hear, who is really in the target group. Don't tell me about labels, because it can really get in the way of me staying open and tuned into what is really working for the people there. Do share with us if you have confirmation biases going on.
Yeah,
in some
exactly.
regards as well.
In fact, we want to hear from you. What are some of your confirmation biases? If you have run into this situation, you have caught yourself running into this type of confirmation bias, or you'll tend to pick on because they say, okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah, very interesting. Because what happens is that then we may reject information that contradicts our confirmation biases or confirmation evidence. So that's very interesting. And what are the implications of that bias in your day-to-day work? The next bias or fallacy is called the mini-me or the affinity bias, which means that we tend to gravitate towards people who are like us, who think like us. We tend to like people who are alike. This is very critical, for example, in recruiting processes, in hiring processes, maybe forming your own team of people. You will tend to select or accept people who have maybe similar backgrounds, similar ideas. And of course, that means that you may be missing a lot of important information, perspectives, views that will enrich your processes, your teams, your thinking, decision-making processes. So very interesting. We are showing here the picture of a celebrity and her daughter, but those in the room who are my age, my generation, might be familiar with this mini-me, Austin Powers and the mini-me, remember? So yeah, so this is what we normally do if we are unconsciously impacted by this affinity bias, that we tend to work with people who are like us and that we see us alike. Any examples of that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. I can see that people are writing in the chat, so that's good. That's
Please.
good. Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, and Sandra, I think that we have yet a third fallacy or...
Yes,
yeah.
I would like to talk a little bit about also our brain in regards to determining happiness or determining what we think is going to make us happy. There's a lot of awareness at the moment around how important it is to be well, to be in a positive emotional state, to have a productive brain. We know that a brain at ease and in a positive emotional state is a lot more productive than when we experience stressing scenarios, because a fight-flight response in our brain gets in the way then. But when it comes to having an idea about what is going to make me happy, my brain is actually not really helpful in that regard, which is a combination of a few inbuilt design flaws of the brain, if you so want. So one aspect is we can't really establish as humans an emotional state as an absolute value. So I can't really say, how happy are you this morning? And I would say 4.2, you know, so I can't really put a fixed point to my happiness. Personal emotional experience are always expressed and experienced as in relation to something else, to a different state. And when it comes to establishing these relative points, these reference points, we're not very good. I'm sure the image that you see here, most people, if I asked you, what is there a difference in size between the two orange dots? By just glancing at it, most people would probably say, yeah, the one on the right is a bit bigger than the one on the left. And I assure you they're not, they're the same size, but our brains in intuitions when it comes to making a judgment about what is more or less, what is bigger or smaller, is flawed. Yeah. And that also affects our perception about happiness. So this is a really interesting piece of research that looked into different levels of happiness described in medal winners, in Olympic medal winners. And what this research showed actually was that the person that experienced the largest degree of happiness is the bronze medal winner. Yeah, so they were all given the same similar study questions to answer to describe their level of happiness. And why is that? It has to do with a reference point. The reference point of the gold medal winner is the silver medal winner. So we tend to choose our reference points from far too close to ourselves. We often don't cast our look wide enough. So we just look at what's going on left and right. Yeah, we compare ourselves to our neighbors, for example. For the bronze medal winner, the reference point is not winning a medal at all. Yeah, and that makes his making it onto the 3 steps actually even more awesome to him. So he uses a similar reference point, which is next to me is no medal at all. But that makes my happiness bigger in comparison. And there's another link in our brain is also we seem to assign greater weight to losses, to what I did not achieve, than to gains. Our brain has an inbuilt kind of negativity bias in that. So for the silver medal winner, again, that means I missed out on having won the gold medal. And for the bronze medal winner, again, that is not so much the case. He is the winner all round, and that is also measured in his happiness levels. There's other studies that show, for example, how watching TV can impact our reference points and our reference systems that we create. And for example, how it shapes the view that we hold on other people's wealth and well-being and our own wealth and well-being. And there's some fascinating stories that show that exactly these tendencies, that we give greater weight to loss than we give to gain. We compare ourselves to flawed reference points when it comes to establishing happiness, shows that higher levels of TV intake actually decreases our individual sense of happiness and worth compared to other people. Yeah. So watching TV makes unhappy, to shorten that a little bit. So our brain is really not very good at making some emotional projections, at establishing what is good for us. And we need that all the time. I mean, when it comes to devising the future strategy, future objectives, what is better for the team, what do we think is going to make us happy, is probably not really what is going to make us happy. Great. So I hope everybody's now thinking about, what do I think is making me happy?
Yeah, exactly.
I think going to be.
You have taken everybody to a really interesting place now, Sandra. And we are going to continue with this fourth fallacy. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, which is when we perpetuate mistakes by continuing doing things based on prior decisions, even though they may not make sense any longer. But we hate to admit in the first place that we were wrong when we made some decision. So we just continue doing those things. A very silly but simple example is the one like you go to the movie theater, you buy the ticket for a movie, and after 10 or 15 minutes, you realize that the movie is not what you expected. But instead of leaving the movie theater, you stay there because you have already invested money in that ticket, right? So if we take these to maybe organizations or maybe projects in which you embark yourself on, and then after a while, you realize that all the money, all the time, all the efforts that you have put in are not really giving you what you expected. So instead of just leaving that, you continue kind of like digging the hole even deeper. Yeah. So it's about really the tendency, as we put on the screen, to follow through on something where we have already invested time or money or efforts, just in the hopes that something will change, instead of realizing that it's better to leave that. Yeah. So that is the sunk cost fallacy. Yeah, I can relate to this sometimes just by reading books that I start and then I just want to finish those books, even though I'm not really enjoying them. So silly examples, but that we can take to other more business-like decisions.
Yeah, enormous levels of buyer's regret during COVID. People bought all sorts of silly things thinking, we're never going to go abroad, so we all buy mobile homes. And now they sit there with huge things that cost a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
So final one.
The final one, and this one is also very interesting, the authority bias, which is our tendency to put or to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of authority figure. So this is the classic example, of the toothpaste commercial showing the image of a dentist, because of course a dentist recommending this toothpaste can only be good, right? And of course, simple example, but then if we take it to other instances in our work, we realize that sometimes we do pay more attention or we are more influenced by the opinion of those that we consider to be, greater importance, greater level of knowledge, etc. So very interesting. And these are only 5. We said there's more than 100, but we can only focus on these 5 today. So what we promised you, Sandra?
Exactly. We promised you a little bit of connection time. So please, Anna is going to share the link into our mirror board. We prepared a bit of a mirror board. We just want to give you a little bit of time to talk to each other and to share your own experiences with any of these fallacies or biases of the brain. So you'll see that we've prepared a nice colorful mirror board. You will be invited to join a breakout room that has been assigned a certain color. So do wait to see what color your breakout room is and then head for that space on the Miro board. And so, for example, if you are the gray team, start in the top box and write in those sticky notes your own experiences. Where do you see any of the brain's fallacies in action in your work? What have you come across? How does that even impact your work? And then after a little while, move on to the box below and to talk about and share, what can you actually do to counteract these mechanisms in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do we want to set the timer, Sandra, or we just tell people?
Sorry, I'm just
sure.
setting up the breakout rooms because I see that I have to do this manually. So just bear with me a little moment here. And I think we can easily give you 10 minutes in breakout. We're sticking about 4 people in each breakout because we have a really nice full house today. And here we go. Watch for that color.
I think people are off to hyperspace now.
Good. Let me just see. I'm going to move Jimena to a different room.
You have the option to stay in the main room?
Howard definitely have the option to stay, and as you know, that we stay and we chat and we discuss.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would fancy a short conversation. Yeah, this is very interesting, especially in positively engaging the authority bias, because in hierarchical organizations, this is just very apparent, isn't it?
Yeah. I can only agree with you, Howard. We can see that having a huge impact in very hierarchical organizations, and you see huge difference between those cultures, not only organizations, but cultures in general, where they place a lot of importance in, what the CEO says or what my boss says, and people do not challenge that enough. And of course, that's very cultural. I'm sure that, is that what you were referring to, Howard?
Exactly. So, I'm originally from Southeast Asia. We're very hierarchical there. But my education isn't so. I believe in flat hierarchy. I believe in holocracy. But I'm currently in the Middle East right now, and it's very hierarchical here as well. So they just are, for a lack of a better word, pig-headed when it comes to their rank within the corporate structure. And I find this very counterproductive when it comes to innovation, because it's very top heavy and they hold the power. They don't share the power with new power. So how would you, in your academic studies or in your curriculums or programs, how do we counter that?
That is very interesting, because actually more and more we are getting requests from typical, very hierarchical organizations that feel the need for flattening the layers so that they can get people to contribute more ideas, to be more innovative. And sometimes we do that by sharing with them some innovation tools or some way of running the meetings so that people will feel that they can really express their ideas, that they are going to not be punished. So there are some ways to make this happen without, of course, disturbing or rocking the boat too much. Because, of course, you also want to be respectful of those organizations that are very hierarchical. But certainly there are ways to bring more innovative ideas. Yeah. Would you agree to that, Sandra?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why we're often brought into support with ideas around, leadership development of support is the signs of too hierarchical structures are often you have more higher levels of stress and absenteeism. They're not adaptive enough. They're not innovative enough. And we're often brought in to help at a completely different level. And then when we start doing a bit of our diagnostic work, the realization comes that, it lands with your leadership, and that's where you need to start making changes. And that can sometimes be a complete blocker to say, yeah, but we can't touch that, and we can't ask these people to change. That's it's a really insightful process that we sometimes trigger, helping people to grow the awareness that it is not down to the individual that is not able to deliver the work, but it is about the work experience that is created by those who manage their workload, who lead and motivate them. And if they can't create the necessary psychological safety for them to be open to contribute without feeling I'm punished if I'm making the wrong suggestion here, then the desired improvements can't happen.
Exactly.
Who builds this, or who sets this change forward? Because, this kind of thinking from, let's say, the bias, the fallacy that's created within the individual, and then thus the organization and the team. So there is kind of this waterfall effect. So at which point and who creates this change? Because I've seen that a lot of people who've had a certain bias, it translates into their, let's say, from school to their college to their work experience, family, and it just keeps growing. So at what point, when it comes in contact with the organization, does this change happen, and who are normally the people who allot this change?
Exactly.
Yeah. I find in that context the idea of, I mentioned that at the beginning of the session, the servant leadership concept is really one that gives me most inspiration and thinking to do right now. The perception or the concept is that everybody can be the initiator and the trigger of change and make an impact in the organization, even if you're not equipped with formal leadership power or position. But that comes with thoughts around then, how do you bring that to people's awareness? So very often it starts all with, we want to grow higher self-awareness because our leaders are so stressed. They need to be more self-aware about, what's good for them and what is not so good for them. So the bringing it to people's awareness that this is what's going on is often the door opener, which is why my motto is, a brain once open can't shut again, growing self-awareness. How would you raise your hand, please?
Yeah, I was just curious, in your studies, in your research, have you ever encountered a different engagements on behavior, on hierarchy and biases, given that you've got Gen X, Gen Z, technically millennials, and what do you call the next one? Digital natives, So they have, they have different approaches when it comes to biases, right? So how does the model change?
I don't think so. I think what they have is different biases.
Exactly.
But they have biases all the same. So you ask a digital native what they think about the digital skills of our generation, for example, and then we should maybe invite them along and see how some mid-50s are playing around with Miro here, or you know.
Yeah.
So I think we're not producing generations that are immune from having these biases affect their thinking processes, but they probably hold their very own stereotypes about their neighboring generations. Again, we look left and right, yeah, and have their own fallacies at play just the same. They just are filled with different content.
Yeah, exactly. It will be the context that will determine which biases or fallacies are having a bigger impact on different generations. But the biases themselves and the fallacies themselves are exactly the same. Because again, it's preconceived notions or just basing your decisions on some faulty information. So that is going to continue, but it's just different types, different contexts that will determine which biases are more predominant for which generation. That was interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Yuan was raising her hand.
Yeah, I was listening carefully, and I love the academic approach of research and understanding there are biases in our minds. We grow up learning it from parents and from schools, and even peers are confirming those biases, and it felt a little bit heavy as the topic is, oh my God, I'm a person suffering from biases.
For you,
just take a pill. Take a pill.
Yes,
it will pass.
Yes, let me buy
Or
a quick
watch less
fix with
TV.
Anna and Sandra. Yes, because you've got those medicines and pills. And then saying that in that way makes it easier to accept. Oh man, I can make mistakes too. Isn't that fun? Yeah. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here and showing us this topic, because it does remind me of how we started before the YouTube was on. In the crew, we very often have these fun jokes about each other, and that lightens it up and makes it possible to point out, hey, you're suffering from bias number 3. Remember Anna and Sandra? You know what I mean? And I hope it for others, also for Howard, for Sarah. I hope so for other people, that they can have joy about being aware that you have these biases, and really funny that I can point out with Anupa. And she can point it out with me,
Exactly. Exactly.
I hope it so much.
Yeah. And there's also a positive side of biases, and well, not fallacies perhaps, but biases. Of course, they help us navigate through life much faster in certain situations. But we need to identify in which situations those biases are playing for us or against us. That is the trick. That is the trick. Yeah.
And I love what you just said. There is a term for exactly that. Is intellectual humility, the concept of intellectual humility, of this being aware, and just even work from the assumption that we might just be wrong. An awful lot. You've done your work for a long time. You've read a lot of books, but stay humble in your acceptance that the brain is flawed and it makes so many mistakes when it looks at information and deals with people. You might just be, a lot more wrong than you think you're right. And I find that quite liberating, because it opens up to conversation, to sharing, to what do you think? Oh, this is interesting.
In
Sandra,
this case, I would say,
how are we doing with time? Sorry.
All under control, don't worry.
Okay,
I'll send them a little reminder, and I'm going to close the room in 1 minute.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Thank you.
So I am glad, the slide with the 100 biases might be wrong. Could be 1,000.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We just didn't want to scare people off.
Well, and this concept in itself, to say, we might be wrong, is so challenging for a lot of people, especially when they are empowered to lead organizations. And a lot of people only accept to be led from people they consider intellectually superior and to know more and to know the answers. And that is, the expert bias we have at play here. And so how do you get that together to say, can I be led by somebody who we can't promote somebody into a managerial role unless they've worked here for at least 15 years, is what you still see in a lot of...
There's such a rebel in me, that says, okay, so what's the meaning of your life? It's coming then up, and
I think the most...
I don't know that if that's a career moving approach, but yes, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that the fact that through bias, one can even realize, it's almost like reflection, that, whether it's a good or a bad bias, that, you have the ability to reflect and build that self-awareness. I think that's also like an aha moment that people can have, like what you were saying, that, what is an outcome for that bias? So, so even if you have one and then, oh, that's me, and then, you change, you create an action to change from that bias.
So I've closed the breakout rooms, so people will start dropping back into the main session here.
Yes, I already see a few people back. And this is your chance, Anna and Sandra, to just pick room and, make them, share their lovely breakout room experience.
Well, there's a lot of movement in the mirror board, so that's great.
That's great.
Can we go back?
To the board, do you want to?
Yes, we had such a great conversation.
Excellent. Manfred, do you want to share a little bit what you were talking about? And I
yes,
did,
maybe Manfred, you can start.
And I did see your question about management and leadership, Manfred. I'd be delighted to have a chat with you about that. Maybe in backstage afterwards. But what was going on in your group, Manfred? You're on mute.
I can't today. I have a client from 12 to 1.
But would you like to share a bit what went on in your breakout group? What made it so interesting?
Oh, we had a great conversation about all kinds of fallacies that we have, and we concluded that a big issue of it is that we probably are more stupid than we think we are.
Absolutely. We scratched on the intellectual humility concept as well. Yeah. But we rather felt it would be more liberating, actually, or it has a liberating power to say, what, the pressure of getting it right, being right first time or 100% right is off when you acknowledge we're here to co-create and to be part of a becoming that is a process, and there is no need to be so, nail-bitingly focused on getting things right.
Yeah, Sandra, I think what we also discussed is that age and maturity is a big factor, because if I take myself, when I was in my 20s, there were many things I needed to prove to myself and to others. I had that clear desire. I'm now 68. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I couldn't care less, which puts me into a completely different position with respect to biases or fallacies or any of that.
Maybe there is a word for that kind of bias. don't give a thing bias.
Don't give a thing bias.
It's self-experience.
Isn't it? Lovely. Would anybody else like to share thoughts or what resonated with you from your breakouts?
So many great ideas on the board. Yeah. Really curious about some of these.
So actually, where is Gorman? Where's my team? I cannot see you. Gorman, yeah. So, because we're talking about that when it comes to the authority bias, a technique that works for Gorman. Can you share it?
Yes, connecting at a human level. So one of the things that we talked about is something I learned in Holland specifically, is that we're all humans. So to put it very crass, all of us need to go to the bathroom. So everybody is doing number two. So remember that when you're thinking about a person that has a sense of authority, is that they also have to go number two. And hola, Ana, nice to see you.
Hey, hola, Gordon. So good to see you.
So that's how he managed that.
I want to share something that one of our colleagues, Wiebke, and I were talking about yesterday. And it's about that authority bias, I think, and it's related to it, which is when you are dealing with somebody who's an authority, and maybe this isn't really about the bias so much, but it could be, that you acknowledge maybe a little bit like your trick, Gorvan. You first acknowledge that the authority figure has authority, and that helps everybody to just put it out there because it is a thing, and then sit down next to them, and then start addressing whatever the question or the problem is. And there's two things there. One is when acknowledging to the authority figure and to everybody else that person has authority, because if that's not acknowledged, it can be in the room, but take on a shape that you don't want it to take on. And the other thing is kind of like the physical presence of sitting at the same level. And I thought those are really interesting ways of dealing with authority.
Yeah. There's acknowledgement step. I find that really interesting. For example, I've had the pleasure of facilitating a number of lightning decision jump processes. And sometimes with and sometimes without a decider figure, where you have that authority of saying, if we get stuck in making a decision, this is the person who's equipped with the necessary power and authority to move us on. And I've done this in culturally very different settings, and having a decider figure went down very differently. Sometimes it was really helpful, and people were able to sit alongside this person on a bench and still partake in the creative process. And in other moments, it was really killing off people's willingness to write anything on the Post-its and to share openly what they really thought, because it was an unhelpful level of authority. Authority there got in the way. So that's obviously big connections to the cultural habits and how people relate to authority. I think it's a very mature thing to say, I can sit alongside what I acknowledge as an authority and still be happy to challenge.
Yeah, and to add to that, Sandra, I think that something that we were discussing while you guys were working on the mirror board is that the big impact of the authority bias in very hierarchical cultures or hierarchical organizations, and how we can challenge or not those authority figures. Once that person speaks up, then the decision is made and nobody is allowed to challenge that. So it has a big impact also on, depending on how hierarchical your culture or your organization is. Yeah, very interesting.
Right, I'm very aware of timings.
Yeah.
Anupa, may I suggest that Anna and I would just share a little summary of some of the best practices recommendations that we've stolen from Harvard Business Review and other sources.
Exactly.
Sure, go ahead.
Just very quickly, something that we said at the beginning is that awareness is your best weapon, because you cannot get rid completely of your biases, but you can become more aware. So some best practice tips for each one of these biases, and we are just going to show on the screen because we are running out of time. But when it comes to confirmation bias, of course, you may want to consider all evidence that are available, and even look for more evidence that may contradict what you already think. And avoid also those people who are just going to say yes to everything that you suggest, that you propose. For the next bias, the mini-me or the affinity bias, it's a very simple recommendation, but really try to seek out people who are different from you, especially in meetings, especially in projects where you are going to need those additional perspectives to make a really sound project carry out a proposal or something. For the bad relatives, Sandra, do you want to take this one?
Well, that really, anchors on that concept of just acknowledge, how potentially influenced your understanding of what is the right reference point and what is the key to happiness might be. And I think Anna posted earlier something about all these techniques around gratitude, practicing these in small doses and regularly to anchor yourself in the moment, to notice actually what's going on. Do I really think having a big car is the key to all happiness, or where am I drawing my reference points from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sanka's fallacy. Just when you find yourself in a hole, just don't keep digging. Just make sure that you stop that and you consider what are really your objectives and what are your options. And also allow some people to just fail because that may make people realize that there are other options that they can try, not because they chose the wrong decision. They need to stick to that, and that applies to yourself, of course. And then for the authority bias, I think that this is provided that you are in a context that allows you to challenge, to question, that is the recommendation there. And again, it's just being more aware of how these biases and others may be impacting our capacity to make the right decisions in some cases. And I think that brings us to the end of our presentation, right, Sandra?
It does.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think it was an eye-opening and also a great reflection for all of us to see what biases that we normally incur and have, and and what are the changes that we can come up with, whether it's on an organizational level or even for our personal. So it was a great session. Thank you. I will ask Yunyan to introduce our next week's session, and after that we can go into the backstage with more conversation with Anna and Sandra. So please stay tuned.
Okay. Hi all. Next week, design thinking is hot, an approach that magically balances business and art, structure and chaos, intuition and logic, playfulness and formality, focusing on humans. But once upon a time, ancient wisdoms have put humans in the center, like Kabbalah or Confucianism. So next week, Federico and myself put dots on the map for you to connect ancient wisdoms and design thinking.
Bravo.
It became very silent in the room. So let me fill this silence for you. And that is, people, if you've got pocket money in your wallet, please buy us a cup of coffee, because we have reached, and I checked it today, 90% for this year. So perhaps you will make us happy with 100%, notwithstanding what Sandra just explained about the bronze medal. Anupa, please finish this jam for us.
There is nothing to finish. It's about to continue. So once you switch off YouTube, Yunyan, we can go over to the backstage and continue.